Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Brilliant.
Welcome, true believers and newcomers alike. Spider-Man co-creator Stan Lee here. Once again, we find our hero Peter Parker, better known around the world as the Amazing Spider-Man, in a heap of trouble. But this is just the beginning, Spidey fans. So get ready for a true superhero action thriller, packed to the brim with thrills and chills, twists and turns, more supervillains than you can shake a web at, and of course, non-stop web-slinging, wall-crawling action.
So just so you know, this video isn't going to be a review in the normal sense. I'm not going to spend a lot of time telling you if you should buy the game, or how great the web swinging is, or anything about the frame rate. Instead, I really just want to hone in on this new take on Spider-Man's world that the game creates. It's been a long time since Stan Lee recorded that intro all the way back in 2000, and gaming has come a long way. Instead of having to settle for a decent approximation of the comics, or playing out an expanded version of the movies, the new game is able to build an entirely new version of the webhead, mixing and matching what it wants from 56 years of the character's history. So today, I want to dig into that world and talk about my favorite and least favorite choices that the game made. One thing before I start though, there will be spoilers in this video, but it won't be until later on, and I'll let you know beforehand. So with that being said, let's get into it.
We're not going to see Jameson. We're going to use his computer database.
Ooh, are we gonna surf the web?
So let's start with the obvious, the game's version of Peter Parker. In my last video, I caught some flack in the comments for not being totally on board with Yuri Lowenthal as the voice for Spidey just yet, and after beating all the story missions in this game, I can confidently say that you all were right. Lowenthal nails it as Peter Parker and as Spider-Man. Sure, not every quip the writers throw his way is gold, but overall, he's able to easily switch gears between Peter's nice guy persona and Spider-Man's confident banter. Even more impressive though is that this script throws some very emotional heavy scenes at him, and he's still pretty great. Spider-Man games have come a long way since, this.
Where's Cage and his search party? The civilian volunteers! Pretty redhead, arm and a gas! You are no help!
Before this game came out, there was a ton of discussion about how this was a more experienced Spider-Man, and I thought that seemed a little overblown. After all, wasn't the Spider-Man in Web of Shadows or Shattered Dimension also experienced? Now though, I can kinda see why they highlighted this so much. Because this might be the first Spider-Man game where the player is given a real sense of history about what this Peter Parker has faced before. Now the backpacks in this game are a very video gamey conceit, but they serve the purpose of drawing a very clear picture of this Spider-Man's world, which I really appreciated. It kind of allowed the developers to have their cake and eat it too. It suggests that the classic stories and even the classic villain costumes totally existed in this world, but now everyone has new stories and, of course, new gear. It's clever, and it's packed with nods to Spider-Man lore that go pretty far beyond the obvious. This is a very minor spoiler, I guess, but I really liked little things like finding a recipe for Aunt May's wheat cakes. Not only does it fill out the world of this game, it's also a reference to Kurt Busiek's great, and usually overlooked, Untold Tales of Spider-Man. This isn't just a fun reference though, it's the kind of character building detail that usually goes overlooked in video games.
Here it is, the records room.
Surf the web, surf the web.
Shut up, Brock, we don't have time.
Parker!
Then there's Mary Jane, and opinions seem torn on her. I will say that from a writing perspective, if I was put in charge of building a new Spider-Man universe, I would want her to be more directly involved in the action. Something that comic writers have struggled with for years is how to fit MJ into a story. After all, it's not all that often that Spider-Man crosses over into the world of high fashion. And that answer usually is she gets kidnapped or attacked by one of Spidey's foes, which instantly ups the stakes. But I think everyone's tired of that. So making her a journalist investigating the same stuff as Spider-Man just makes sense. I think it was the right choice here. I just wish they had retained more of classic Mary Jane's attitude. I liked this MJ fine, but between her, Peter, and Miles, there's a lot of very earnest, go-getting young people running around, and it would have been nice if one of them contrasted with that a little more. That being said, the writing in the Peter MJ scenes is really well done. Christos Gage, one of the writers of this game, has always excelled at writing people who fundamentally care about each other but aren't getting along. He's shown that off really well in his Angel and Faith and Buffy the Vampire Slayer comics, and I can definitely feel his influence here. Since Peter became Spider-Man 8 whole years ago, it's clear that the couple have been through a lot. And their relationship problems have long moved past stuff like, should I tell her I'm a superhero, that we've seen tackled over and over again, which I thought was really refreshing. One of the more standout moments from the story for me was actually just an argument over text that the pair have. It's definitely relatable, and it manages to feel both really modern without that being forced and like a classic Spider-Man problem at the same time. But let's talk a little bit more about Spider-Man himself. As someone who loves the everyman quality of the character, I guess I just need to accept the fact that between this and Homecoming, all of his suits from now on are going to be really high-tech and have a bunch of bells and whistles. And I get it, it adds a lot of gameplay variety, and on that front, it was definitely a smart choice. They can also justify it, since Peter is a scientist, it makes sense he'd be able to upgrade his gear. But to me, the more of this kind of stuff that you add to the character, the less of an average guy he becomes. And I really don't think we need another Iron Man. That's a very small complaint though, in a new Spider-Man world that's, in general, very cleverly constructed. But of course, I can't really break down the story in any meaningful way without getting into spoiler territory. So yeah, here's your warning: if you don't want to know how the story ends, feel free to come back later.
You'll pay for this, Kingpin. I swear you'll pay.
Alright, so let's talk about them. Otto Octavius and Norman Osborn. They made some pretty major changes to those characters here. The first is that Otto and Norman are actually co-founders of Oscorp before having a falling out. They kind of established this Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak dynamic, where Osborn tends to get most of the credit while Otto worked more behind the scenes. That story is blended together with Mr. Negative's origin, where it's implied that Otto quit Oscorp over the experiment that killed Martin Li's parents, forcing him to start his own company that Norman seems intent on crushing. Now, this is a radically different origin for Doc Ock, but it retains some of the same story beats. I recently reread Doc Ock's first story in Amazing Spider-Man number 3 and watched Spider-Man 2. And even though all three of those origins are very different, I found it interesting that they all had Doc Ock's mind being kind of corrupted and changed. But that change only served to amplify what was already there, just under the surface: his extreme arrogance. In one of Otto's last scenes in the game, the difference between his and Peter's philosophy becomes very apparent. Otto says that they have to use their talents in service of others, even when they don't appreciate it, which Peter is clearly taken in by. After all, it's kind of the cornerstone of Spider-Man's whole life. But then Otto says that they have to do what's best for those beneath them, which Peter is horrified by. I love this moment because it perfectly illustrates how these two view the world. Marvel stories are filled with scientists and geniuses who invent weird, miraculous, and often destructive things. And it usually comes down to how that individual views others that will define them as a hero or a villain. Yeah, Doc Ock's mind had been tampered with, but the seeds of what made him a person willing to poison New York City in service of a petty personal hatred were always there. And I think that by the end of the story, Peter realizes that. And then Aunt May dies. And look, Aunt May dying, or the threat of Aunt May dying, is not a new concept. Writers have used it as a plot device many times through the years. But I would say that its role in this story is particularly smart. The choice is put in Peter's hands. He can use the entire serum to save Aunt May right then, or give them time to make more of it and save everyone sick in the city. It's a cruel decision, and it's exactly the kind of heightened, tough emotional choice that I absolutely love in superhero stories. There's never much doubt that Peter is going to make the right choice though, because Peter Parker just isn't the kind of person who lets thousands of people die, even if it means a huge sacrifice on his part. And it's that, not the ability to drop a web blossom on a rooftop full of gangsters, and what really separates him from Otto Octavius and Martin Li. As for Norman, I will say that Harry Twist was really something. Not that surprising maybe, like from the moment Mary Jane broke into Norman's penthouse, I kind of figured out what was going on, but it was still a great tease. I'm wondering though if they were hinting at a future Green Goblin or a future Venom. The green tank suggested one thing, but it did kind of look like a symbiote at the very end there, so I'm not sure. Either way though, I thought Norman didn't quite have enough to do in this game, but what we did get was definitely interesting. As for Miles getting powers, that was expected, but well executed enough, I guess. I'm really curious if we're going to control both him and Peter in the next game, like maybe switch between the two. But overall, I didn't think he was super necessary for this story. But okay, in the end, Spider-Man PS4, what'd I think? Well, I think it's clearly the best Spider-Man game ever made, and easily one of my favorite games I've played this year. The gameplay is silky smooth, and the collectibles are a ton of fun, but it's this new version of Spider-Man and his world that I think are the game's real accomplishment, and I honestly can't wait to see where they take it next. One controversial element of the game that I really spent a lot of time with was actually the puzzles, which I found surprisingly addictive while playing as Peter Parker. But I will say they were a bit easy. If you're really looking to solve some puzzles and learn along the way, I highly recommend Brilliant. Brilliant offers you the most fun way to learn, not by memorizing formulas and repeating them over and over again, but by creating really engaging questions for you to use your critical thinking skills to solve. It both gives you the tools to learn and presents you with a really great challenge. I especially enjoy the logic section, which I go back to over and over again because it throws some really entertaining problems at you. So to support the channel and learn more about Brilliant, go to brilliant.org/midnight and sign up for free. Oh, and the first 200 people to go to that link will get 20% off the annual premium subscription. Again, that is brilliant.org/midnight.